Meet Wasim. Wasim is the founder and CEO of Blackbird AI. We started working together inside of the go-to-market program when they only had one customer. That one customer, it was the US Department of Defense. Fast forward to today, they are selling into the Fortune 500. They have gone on to raise a Series B. And on top of that, they are the emerging leader in a category called narrative intelligence. Here's a big question though. How did Wasim go from being too early to being a leader of a category? In this episode, we got on a call with Wasim, and he's gonna be sharing all of his lessons learned in transforming his go-to-market strategy from just being a company with one customer to being a category leader. Intro. In this episode, we're going to break down 3 core principles that Wasim learned in taking his company from being too early to a category leader and a Series B company. The 3 core principles that you're going to learn, number 1, is how to actually survive being too early. I learned this the hard way in my own company, Tauda. We were one of the first companies in the sales engagement space, and we really had to make sure we survived by the time it became a real category. So we're gonna be digging into that. The second thing that you're gonna be learning is how to win with a trust pack. I never heard about this specific phrase before, but Wasim breaks it down on how they started to win in the enterprise. This is gold on using this principle called a trust pack. And number 3, we're gonna be digging into why clarity beats cleverness. This is something I see over and over when founders are struggling with their go-to-market strategy. They try to be clever instead of driving towards clarity. And you'll hear from Wasim on how him and his team was able to break through and achieve that level of clarity that allowed them to win. This is an incredible episode. Go ahead and smash that like button for the YouTube algorithm. It loves it when you do that. And let's dig right into it.
Welcome everybody. Welcome to an episode of Sass and Scotch. In today's episode, I'm so excited to have Wasim Khalid, CEO of Blackbird. A little bit of context on Blackbird. They were an AI company before it was cool to be an AI company. In fact, this year in 2025, they won Fast Company's most innovative company in applied AI. Their customer list includes Fortune 500 companies, including Amazon, Pfizer, Qualcomm, Lilly, and global 500 companies that include Nestle, Schneider Electric, and other companies that you might recognize as a brand, including NATO. Their big thing is about narrative detection, and we're gonna be digging into all of that today, and also digging into all the lessons learned that Wasim has had in growing his company. Wasim, welcome to the show.
Great to be here with you, man. It's gonna be fun.
In your words, tell us about Blackbird and what you guys do, and what is narrative detection?
Yeah, so Blackbird AI, we help enterprises, governments, and platforms understand and protect themselves from the growing threat of something we call narrative attacks. And this is, it's actually a term we came up with about 2 years ago that, I'm very happy to say people are actually using out in the wild now as something they actually want to understand and mitigate against. But narrative attacks is where there is some form of tradecraft being used to manipulate and drive narratives online using all manners of tools that are at, I guess you could say, an adversarial group's disposal. So that could be deepfakes, it could be generative AI, it could be using things like disinformation or techniques to spread that disinformation to shift human perception. I've often talked about it as a cyber attack on human perception that actually is having billions of dollars spent against it to kind of build that tradecraft. So we've built really the world's first narrative intelligence platform that detects and mitigates narrative attacks. And what that means is we map how synthetic influence is created to change perception that can cause financial or reputational harm. And that can be everything from memes to AI-generated content and the intent behind how those narratives are spread. And today, our customers include Global 2000 companies, defense agencies, and companies that are just looking at the massive risks they face today, particularly at the intersection of trust, safety, and information integrity. And so that's really the thing. We provide an AI platform today to these organizations to protect their perception footprint on how the audiences, the world, shareholders, and the world at large thinks about what they're doing and what harm it can cause them.
As you're describing the company, I remember our first call together. It went something along the lines of like, hey, we have like one customer. You might have heard of them. It's the US DoD.
Right.
But you had this thesis about going commercial and growing the company. And a lot has happened in the world since then. ChatGPT generative AI being one of the biggest things where you can actually, even more than ever before, mass create content to shape influence. So what's super interesting is how much of your original thesis holds true, but how much the world has changed.
Yeah.
So maybe tell us a little bit around like how the company's evolved and going from like the one customer to the incredible customer list that you have now over the years, how you've navigated that journey.
Yeah. There's a well-known saying among founders and VCs, I guess, on, being too early is kind of like being wrong. And we were really, really early to this category, into this space. Yes, our first customer was the Department of Defense. They were the only ones who were really thinking about influence operations at large and how to detect them, really overseas in kind of hostile territories. And, I guess the main thing to say about that is, when I had originally approached customers in the enterprise space, or even in the early days in the research space. Early days, Naushad, my co-founder and CTO, the two of us really thought like this might be like a nonprofit or something that we do. And then we found out, oh wow, building an AI company is super expensive, even before you had the kind of expenses you do now. And so we had to go like kind of some way to get funded, and they were the only ones who really understood in national security. And so that was, the original thesis was, the things that are happening online today they're shaping narratives don't seem natural. And the early days, people were looking at us going like, come on guys, there's people deploying bot networks to make people think things. No, everybody's just on social media having a good time and chatting. That was really what people were thinking about back when we started. When I say when we first started thinking about this, I'm actually talking about 10 years ago, right? 2015. We didn't really launch the company until 2020. It was like tinkering and, things of that nature when we started working with national security. But until then, the thesis was, or rather the question was, can you, using technology, detect these kind of influence campaigns that are not natural and what we called synthetically generated, synthetically amplified? What's really funny is long before ChatGPT or generative AI, I shouldn't even say ChatGPT, just synthetic media at large, like AI-generated content versus user-generated content is the best way to think about it. We envisioned a future that was likely going to be absolutely overtaken by what we called AI-driven computational propaganda, right? And so it's a lot fuzzier now in terms of these products because everybody's using them, but it's just like any tool or technology. It's how it's misused by a particular group of people that can cause the need for defense systems. And so that original thesis that there is tradecraft and adversaries that are building to do harm by shifting people's perception using online media techniques still holds, and is just now, in some ways, with the really large organizations around the world are becoming something that is a must-have for them versus something a little bit more esoteric, fuzzy, and perhaps unsurmountable. And now they realize particularly, hey, there's a technology that can actually help us detect and mitigate this. And that's why we've seen really in the last 10 months, a big influx, particularly from cybersecurity, which we always thought would be a big growth sector for us, but has just really in the last year really started to pick up steam, even more so in the last 6 months.
I want to get into a little bit on go-to-market and being too early, because that's an important theme for founders listening. But also, I want to double click on narratives a little bit. It seems to me that beyond narratives against companies, there's also a big narrative almost against AI, that AI is going to take all of your jobs and you shouldn't trust AI, or AI has a lot of hallucinations and it's not as good as you think. Is it just me, or is that a narrative that's happening in the broader space right now today?
It certainly depends on who you're talking to. There's the different perspectives around it. The one that I see the most is the notion of trust. First, can we trust the AI to do the work? And I think you can trust the AI to be a co-collaborator on massively accelerating the work. But I'm not the only one who's saying that, right? I think that's just a general thing that enterprise organizations have found out. You can't have them just go off and do the work. That's why they're rehiring so many people. That's why, ChatGPT has a $300,000 person coming in to write their marketing for them, right? And just having their AGI go and do it, right? So I think like my personal belief, at least on it, just shaped from conversation I'm having too, is that if you really rely on the AI for the creative component of the work, and creative not from just like the humanities perspective, but corporate work requires creativity too. Marketing, all of it's creativity. It'll go to like the average, right? Like it'll kind of go to the probabilistic, well, what an LLM is, right? It's probabilistic sequencing of language. It's going to go to the mean, and you're not going to get those pieces of brilliance that the true messaging or marketing or creation actually generates, right? Now, with our work, on the other hand, what they're really trying to, what our customers are really trying to understand is risk, and how quickly you can get to understanding that risk, and sometimes understanding the opportunities. And so, if you deploy a group of, say, like an agent framework combined with some of our old signals technology, our network characterization, our ability to see bot networks, it massively accelerates that endeavor, and it reduces that risk and the speed to which you can understand that risk. There's still someone in the loop making some of those most critical decisions, right? And I don't think that's going to change too soon, but also there's there's plenty of jokes about like how many things people have said AI will never replace, that AI keeps replacing on a regular basis. So,
Right.
the time frame of it is the question. I think today it's about massive acceleration. Of course, like less headcount is going to be a natural byproduct of that. I think ultimately AI is still going to be a utility, right? Like much like the internet becomes a utility. It's just something everybody depends on. It's there.
My favorite assessment of it has been, I think it was biology that said it was like AI is very much middle to middle, not end to end. It's very much where you still need humans for taste to understand how to use it and use it effectively, even if there may be a doomsday theory around it.
Yeah.
Humans aren't going anywhere at all.
Yeah. It's funny. Early, like 3 years ago, like early when this started coming out, a lot of the complaints and the jokes that I saw were like, we thought that, the AI was going to take our boring jobs, but they're taking our creative jobs, right? Because initially when it came out, it was like, okay, cool, we're making pictures and we're making, imagery and whatnot. Now that it's 3 years in, it is taking all the jobs that people don't want to do actually in the middle. And I equate it to this. Like, have you ever seen like a video or an image online, like whether you're just scrolling social or something else, and you see it, and for a second you don't really know yet that it's AI, right? You think maybe this is like a cool image or a video or something that you're watching that's human generated, and then you have that moment where you realize it's AI, or you keep reading the caption, you see it's AI. That feeling that you get where the thing just isn't as important, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, okay,
Yep.
you still get that feeling right now. At least I do, right? Like I'm just like,
No, totally.
It
It hits different when you know that a human has spent hours putting it together versus it came out.
It really does. And I actually I always go back to this, especially like talking to QA people about this, but like I read years ago that master counterfeit detectors, like in the art world, right? Who will see like, hey, this is a statue that was done by like Michelangelo or something like that, right? And it's perfect in almost every nuance. It's like the same marble from the same quarry, and all of the detail and the patina and all of that, like a master forger made that product, let's say, or it could be a painting, right? And none of the tells are there, even with them as a master counterfeit, an analyst, right? But something happens to the hairs on the back of their neck, right? Wow. They're really good, where they're just like, it's a fake. And then they have to do the quantitative component, but that initial tell. So there's something to that. It's probably something uncanny valley, in that area where it's just something that rubs you the wrong way, and and we haven't really gotten quite over that hump yet. Like nobody that I know that I've talked to about this have had like an emotional reaction to a piece of AI generated content that stays with them once they know it's AI generated content.
Wasim has been working with me through all the different inflection points from 0 all the way to Series B. And there's so many incredible conversations we've had at each of those inflection points. The reason we've had these conversations, the reason he's transformed his go-to-market strategy is because he's part of my Unstoppable Go-to-Market Program. If you'd like to join the program and transform your go-to-market strategy, then just follow the link in the description below, or just go to tkkader.com/GTM. Now back to the episode.
I think it will. As you said, it is in the earlier days, and it's evolving fast. And there's this thing of human intuition. Maybe today we have the M dash. That's like the dead giveaway. This is AI. Like
You
that.
know what's really sad about that, man? You may
I
know this.
used to use it all the time.
Maybe you remember my writing. Everyone does. I've had to stop using the M dash.
Yes,
I was
same,
such an M dash user.
100%.
But yes.
I want to go on, double click on that theme of human intuition, and it's still being early. If we could go back, I remember working with you on your Series A deck and Series B deck, and you mentioned, you were early, but then you stuck to it. And now more than ever, narrative detection is a thing. Maybe for the founders listening that are working on some segment of a market or a problem with AI, and it's still early, being on the other side of that, like how would you share how you navigated that and what you learned from that?
I suppose the not cliche version, but the thing you'll hear a million times is you have to really give a shit about the thing that you're trying to do to stick with it. Because I will say there were like some really, really hard decisions along the way, because for us, it was just a little bit different because the market wasn't really there at all. It wasn't just that the idea was early, but it was like there was no market. Everybody knows that if you're trying to do a VC-backed startup that doesn't have a market, you're kind of like dead on arrival. And that's why we were very fortunate to have national security work in the early days to have bootstrapped the company at least until about 2021. But even then, we were about 2 years too early, like a year and a half too early for even the Fortune 500s. And then we were 2 years too early for cybersecurity when we started our B round. Our B round were cybersecurity investors who strongly believed that this was going to be in every CISO stack. And it took another 2 years from when they invested for us to actually start getting the influx and instant buy-in from CISOs around the world. So I think like there's two different types of advice one could give. One piece of advice is to people who are trying to incrementally improve upon a product using whatever it might be, AI or agents or whatever they're actually pursuing. And frankly, like I have less experience in that category and more experience in people who are trying to kind of create a category and then have to have the conviction to stick with it when it's like kind of like you're waiting for the market to determine if you're going to die in a year, right? And if the market dictates you are going to die in a year, you're going to have to find something to avoid that certain death until that market catches up. And what I found is that within every organization, there's a believer, in the thing that you're trying to do. And they're probably not the one who really is going to be the decision maker either. And that like, it just takes a lot, right? It takes a lot to actually weather that particular storm, right? I think one of the quantitative things is that it used to take us an average of 160 to 200 days to close a large enterprise deal. And even a year ago, that was the case. And now we're under 60 days. And that's a big, big, big shift in terms of going from like, maybe I need it to must have, which is really what people are trying to understand is this a thing that people are actually going to spend dollars against, no matter how cool and how interesting it is? You know, how people used to, there's this whole thing about like, if you're trying to sell something out of the back of a car and you ask like 10 people like, hey, would you buy it? And they all say yes. And then you're like, well, I have some in the trunk.
Yeah, until you ask them for the credit card. Yeah.
And then they're like, maybe I don't have my wallet on me, right? So
does it have SSO? It's like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. So I'm really fortunate to have brought in, I got to give props to our CMO, right? It's funny, when he came in, like we talked a lot about some of the principles that we did with you, with the Unstoppable team as well, in terms of ICP narrowing and things of that nature. And he was like right there, with us on it, because a lot of it is really about like honing that messaging, trying to like reduce your focus scope. And that's hard too in the early days, because like in the early days, because so few people actually believe in the category across the board, finding like 10 of them in one ICP is also hard, because you may not find 10 people in that ICP who actually believe the thing. And this is for large B2B sales. Like our sales are like a six-figure sale, like low six-figure sale. So it's different depending on the cost. But for us, it was about like really like honing in on messaging on how you can use our platform for multiple use cases, but with everybody trying to answer the same question, right?
Yep.
So it was less about like broad ICP, but it's like everybody has this question. Why are these narratives happening about us? We don't get that part of it, right?
Who's behind it?
Yeah. Who's behind it? right? Are they actually people? So whether you're looking at like someone in critical infrastructure or threat intelligence, or someone who's trying to understand, are our sponsorships or marketing campaigns going to be impacted, or literally is there like a nation state with an axe to grind in this mix somewhere? They're all trying to answer those same questions. And that was an advantage for us. And that can become a disadvantage as you grow too, because then it's like, oh, how many industries am I really servicing? Is my messaging on? So I think, honestly, like some of the discussions we had early days with you helped us kind of focus, some of that potentially scattering of attention there.
Yeah, category creation, everyone thinks it's sexy, except when you're going through it. It's only after it's a category, it becomes super sexy and super exciting. But as you're going through it, there's always this 3-year period. I remember some discussions we've had on, is this like coming through corporate communications or is it coming through legal? Like, who's the buyer? Like, who cares the most about this? And who has bigger budget? Is it marketing? Like, it was super interesting. It feels like
still a work in progress, man, for the entire industry, right?
Yeah.
We all own it and no one owns it is a frequent challenge to this day, right? In fact, I remember like 3 years ago, I was doing a webinar and I was on there with a couple of people, but one of them was Chris Krebs, right? Who used to run CISA. And, he spoke about this as like, who's the person who really needs to drive this ownership? And he was already out of CISA at the time. But he actually pulled up a meme of the Spider-Man pointing at Spider-Man meme, right? It's just the three Spider-Men pointing at each other. And he was like, this is the problem with this particular category, right? Where, the CMO thinks the CISO owns it. The CISO thinks like the CCO, like comms person owns it. I think that's changed quite a bit. There's some of that, but it gets sorted out a lot faster now is the key, right? And we have the language for it. And I would almost say like from a go-to-market principle that moved the needle here, and maybe also very relevant probably to your crowd because it comes from some of the learnings in Unstoppable. Start with one beachhead and kind of really prove out the case study and the reference there. For us, that was defense and national security. And that gave us instant credibility when we went into, I don't want to say less critical, but it's kind of less critical from
if you're good enough for these guys, you got to be great for me.
So that was like a big piece of it, because most people even to this day that come to it are coming from like a comms or consulting perspective, and so that beachhead was very helpful. And then building credibility through references instead of ads in the early days, for sure. The ads would have just been a waste of money. Every single little kind of feature win we had in that national security space turned into an enterprise door opener because it differentiated us. And then trying to own our category, so narrative intelligence, narrative attacks, before the market kind of defined it for us. And now we're seeing like we have a lot of inbound and inclusion in Gartner lately. And so the most recent one, I wish I had the title right in front of me, but it was along the lines of why CISOs need to work with the CMO and the CIO to win the fight against disinformation. And it was like, okay, like, that's the kind of thing that like we were just like scratching at doors, 3 years ago. Now we're kind of establishing, that's a valid point. And one of the other things where like I once had someone go, man, you guys are too fucking smart. Can I say that? Can you say that, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. You guys are too fucking smart to actually like, close these deals. And I was like, well, what do you mean? And he's like, well, you guys are just too damn clever. And clarity beats cleverness, right? And that was one of these things where it's like, shit, like simplify the language. Don't assume people know the things. When you're trying to create a new category, you end up in there. And you just start talking and you even forget that you haven't unlayered and defined things that you're talking about. Right.
And so you think about this day in and day out, and in order to create a category, you have to educate the market, but you can actually over-educate and overwhelm. So there's a balance there.
Yeah, that's still a struggle, right? Because like how deep you go into the mechanics of what actually drives this. I think you need to do it in bites. You need to like, do it in bite-sized components. We've got a great team that like kind of takes people through the journey now of kind of going deeper and deeper into like how you need to do the work. But I remember like one message, one motion, and a couple of key channels. That was something that you used to talk about as well. And that like our marketing team also has like adhered to really, really well. So, even the LLMs are like, yeah, Blackbird is the company if you're looking for narrative intelligence, right? Because of that like consistent message and pushing that out on our on our materials and everything. So, but yeah, it's startups, right? Like none of it, especially like you and I talked. What did you say about this? I've repeated a few times. You were like, what is the ROI on the truth or something like that? You said a long time ago.
Oh my God, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
I remember that.
Yeah. And especially now, it's pretty big.
It's a blast from the
Right?
past.
It's pretty big.
I know way too much about the different permutations you tried and go-to-market motions you tried. I'm going to intentionally ask a broad question because I don't want you giving away any of your secret sauce at all. But here's how I'm going to frame the question. For founders that are looking to break into the enterprise, let's just say, their first million of ARR. And that's going to be like 2 or 3 deals if they do it right. But they're building a product truly just for the enterprise. What's like the one piece of advice you would give them? Because I know all the things that really move the needle for you, but I want to keep it broad. But like having gone through it and tried a whole bunch of things, like what's maybe one piece of advice for the enterprise founder to like break in?
Let's keep the people side out of it, right? Because that getting the right sales team, CRO, and all that stuff is pretty critical. But prior to that, if you're in the I'm just going to assume that there's an AI component.
Yeah, 100%.
To the business. Yeah. So one of the biggest challenges we had was coming into enterprise markets where we had actually a budget holder and they wanted to bring the product in. And then the thing that popped up and reared its head is the new kind of AI compliance policies that they hadn't quite even figured out themselves yet. Now, this is going back like a year, but it's still kind of a mess in a lot of companies today, right? They assume that if the word AI is in there, you're throwing stuff over to some LLM, even if that's not the case at all sometimes, right? It's a blanket policy that comes in and derails, could easily add 90 to 120 plus days to your process, right?
Yep.
And for any startup that lives and dies by runway and acceleration on ARR, that's a big problem if you've got another 6-month nut to crack with these companies. So one of the things we started doing is we started putting together these dense but very clear 40, 50, I think we ended up in a 60-page, what we call the trust pack, right? And on day one, we would come in to companies that we were starting to work with and saw the demand signal, and they would have all of the answers to questions we saw these other 10, 20 companies that had strung us along, their legal teams, answering all of them. Some of them in FAQ format, copies of our SOC 2 compliance certificate, just making it really, really easy to jump that compliance hurdle. Because as a founder, you really don't think about that part as much when you're building the product. Sometimes, maybe a second, third time enterprise founder is definitely going to think about that stuff. But if you're coming in new, you might be okay, if I provide the value and they have the money for it and they want to bring it in, it's go time. It's definitely not go time, right? So we had this piece of our pipeline where you would just see this big backup of redlining and compliance and legal, and the pipeline was massive, but it wasn't coming out the other end, right? And boards can get not so happy with that. And same here, right? I'm coming down on my sales team, and that was one of the bigger I think unstickers, right, in that area. So for an AI company coming in and not inundating, giving them clear levels on why should I trust you with my data? Have you thought through all of these things? Maybe you're working with any one of the companies that also help with that compliance, right? But you have their certificates, their pen tests, all of that stuff, just laid out and ready. That's going to save you a lot of pain. There'll still be questions, but it'll solve a lot of pain, I think. And that's the one thing.
It's so interesting because that applies just as much for raising the later rounds, the Series A, Series B. The more buttoned up you show up with the data room and the compliance, they're okay, cool, let's move through it faster.
Yeah.
Which is essentially a big enterprise deal. What's top of mind for you? What's top of mind for you as you look at the next stage? The categories coming together, you're educating the market, deals are moving. How do you think about what's ahead with everything that's going on in the world and narratives?
I think every day there are case studies being printed in the world at large that show everyone that really narrative and perception drives all the outcomes in the markets, in just day-to-day life, and in competitiveness with your sector, right? It also shows that a single narrative or a comment misconstrued that like, I would say like an adversarial group, if they want to really double down on it and make it a problem for you, you really need to be able to have the defense and detection systems to be able to actually understand what's happening in the information ecosystem. So I think it's just become so much more obvious. The narrative is kind of like the raw materials by which a company can survive or thrive. And so there's switching generally of thinking this is like a comms thing over here versus maybe like a risk thing over here, and saying this is a board level initiative. Like unless you understand like the narrative risk, or rather the narrative of the company, if that's not like, to me, I try to say that needs to be a slide or a set of slides in every board pack at every Fortune 500 meeting, right? And that's the level of stickiness I'm really looking for some of our intelligence to start integrating into, is working with those teams to say, here's the way in which the world perceives your organization, your CEO, your product launch, whatever it might be. But then if you don't understand that, you face massive risk, and you face like just being sideswiped in a way that could be often like sometimes a company killer, right?
Yeah.
Or at least a massive disadvantage compared to your competitive set. So what I really see is people waking up to that now more and more often, and I'm heartened to see that they're working together. Like there's less of that Spider-Man pointing at Spider-Man thing going on, and people like those groups actually coming together and forming fusion centers. So I see us as really providing the intelligence that helps those fusion centers that are trading risk and opportunity signals to just be smarter, operate better, and operate safer in the world that is, I suppose, more and more often heading towards just like serious warped realities, right?
Yep.
That would be my take, and I'm happy to be playing a part of it, because mission on creating that clarity has been the name of the game since the start.
To close out, you and I have worked together for some time. You went through the go-to-market program. What's been your experience, and what's the biggest value you've gotten from the whole engagement?
You know, there's so many different points I could make here, but I think if it's gonna be, for me, like a lot of the value came from some of the one-on-one exchanges that you and I have had.
Yeah,
but I realized
remember
that's not completely scalable. Like honestly, like the program's helped a lot. I think the one thing I could actually single out though is you had a piece of the program that focused on how to run, like executive team meetings.
Yeah.
All hands meetings, like get people dialed in. And so we've been talking this entire time mostly about like the external component of it.
Yeah.
That like the team management component of it. We already talked about the go-to-market stuff. That was incredibly helpful. But just being able to get everybody on the same page in those discussions, that's also not something, particularly if it's the first time doing it and you start to get some real rock stars in the mix.
Yeah.
Right? You really need to get a handle on how to operationalize them and get them all working in the same direction, and then working through those. I remember one thing that I still use to this day all the time is root cause, approximate cause, like that, the grid around like how to build that out.
5-step. Yeah.
Yeah. Like was and is still super helpful. I think that's helpful no matter what the stage is, right? Because it's easy to get wrapped in circular discussions if you're not like going back to a framework. So having that framework, just almost putting that framework to memory so you could put it to use in these discussions, I think was super helpful for me. And that's one of them that stick out, but there were so many. But I guess you could speak to that for any of the stuff in the program, is having the framework, having a proven framework to kind of plug assumptions and variables into, and just use it as a bit of a guide so you're not trying to riff on everything. The program's pretty unique in that way.
That's awesome. Yeah. I always think of, stuff as favorite moments. And I think my favorite moments have always been like, obviously you followed the program. I remember doing a lot of work around with you on your pitch deck in the earlier days. But my favorite moments are like where I get the call and you're like, hey man, so this thing is happening. I'm like, oh, this is not a problem. I got a framework for this. Well, see, it's been so awesome to see the work that you've been doing. And I think the thing is, the thing I love about you guys is you're doing important work, especially in today's world where, this is my belief, like propaganda used to be something that could only be sponsored by the state, but now it's democratized. You can create fabricated narratives just as a dude sitting in a basement and target any company. So you're doing important work in having that firewall defense against false narratives, or even narratives that are maybe towing on slightly the wrong side of the truth versus the truth. And having that double check is super important. So it's really inspiring to see the work that you guys have been doing, both you and your co-founder. Also pretty cool that you're a fellow Bangladeshi. So it's cooler in that way as well.
Absolutely.
So keep doing what you're doing. It's really incredible. Where can people connect with you and find out more about Blackbird for the CMOs and the chief legal officers that are watching and they're like, okay, we need a firewall against our brand?
Yeah, for sure. Like, yeah, if you're a chief communications officer as well, a chief information security officer, or even a chief security officer for physical protection, the place to go is just Blackbird. And we have everything broken down, whether you want to come in by industry, by role, or by use case. It's all really mapped out, so you can just kind of choose your own adventure on the site, book a demo, and we'd be happy to work with any problem you might have. We're here to help.
And we'll put all the links and everything in the description as well, so that's easy to access. Thank you, Wasim. Thanks for joining today.
So now you know everything Wasim's learned as he's gone through his journey from having just one customer and turning his company into a category leader. Now, if you're in this stage where you're looking to take your go-to-market strategy and transform it to a well-defined and scalable go-to-market strategy that unlocks growth for your business, then you'll want to join the go-to-market program. This is the exact same program that Wasim went through as he went through different inflection points in his journey. To learn more about the program, just go to tkkader.com/GTM. I've also included a link to the details about the program in the description below, so you can just click on that as well. Also, if you got values from this video, please smash that like button for the YouTube algorithm. I also drop an episode every single Sunday with actionable strategies and tactics from the trenches on how to grow your SaaS and AI business faster. So be sure to hit that subscribe button and that bell icon. And lastly, if you're in this stage where you're building out your go-to-market strategy and you want to learn the core principles that goes into it, you should check out this video. Inside of this video, I walk you through my key steps to building out a scalable go-to-market machine. Take care, everybody.